Hey, David Ralphoff here. Today I just wanted to talk a little bit about things I wish I knew when I had started into my programming career. I've been programming for 15 to 20 years working on web apps, primarily worked with companies in the San Francisco Bay Area, so San Francisco, Mountain View, Palo Alto. I've worked a bit with companies in around Portland as well, Portland, Oregon. Um, and yeah, there's a lot of things I've learned a ton of stuff along the way. So I thought I'd just give you, maybe my five or ten top tips that I wish I had known. So um, yeah, a lot of this is going to be about thinking more about what you really want to do and thinking a little more long term about what you're doing and kind of like having some awareness as you're going through your learning process. So um, probably one of the hardest things to do in programming is like get your first job. This is kind of a notoriously difficult thing. You'll hear a lot of people complain about how difficult it is. All these interviews you have to go through, and so many people are just looking for people that are have a couple years experience already. And part of that is software engineers are really expensive for one. The other thing is there's just a lot of risk, like even hiring somebody who's pretty experienced. Uh, you don't necessarily know if it's going to be a good fit. You don't know like what the working style is going to be. Um, there's just a lot of things that like one of the reasons software engineers get compensated well is because you have kind of an outsized impact on the company. So just one really bad mistake from a software engineer can have a pretty big impact on the company. So people are generally a little more hesitant to hire brand new or junior engineers unless there's some kind of mentoring in place or some system in place to basically like help those people get experience and make sure that their standards are kind of matching what the company needs. So getting that first job is really tough. So what I would recommend doing is as you're going through either school or your coding boot camp or learning on the side or whatever it is that you're doing, like do something to show that you're interested and motivated. So have a side project or have a project that you can share somewhere, whether that's like GitHub or GitLab or just someplace that people can access it. That'll let them see kind of where you are with your coding experience. They'll probably look for things like whether or not you're doing testing, which is something I'll talk more about here in a bit. They might look for like common mistakes that people make when they start. So it's not a big deal. I mean, even experienced programmers make mistakes on stuff or do weird things all the time. But it basically will just show you have an interest, you're willing to share what you've been working on. They might even ask you to like talk through something you've done just to see kind of where you land. Um, and then I'm giving you this advice as somebody who's done a ton of interviewing for engineering positions. Uh, so if you don't have that, the other thing you can do, and I would recommend really anybody do this who's in school or boot camp or whatever, is like try to do an internship. Ideally, it's paid. You might end up finding one that's unpaid. I think the more important part is just finding a place that you respect or a team that you would want to work with that you feel like you would learn from, because that's really kind of the main thing you're going to try to get out of an internship. You might do a couple things that are productive, but while you're there, but a lot of it will just be focused on learning and maybe probably building like an internal tool for somebody to use or like helping out a more experienced engineer with something. Um, so yeah, anything you can do there. Getting an internship that'll help you get some job experience. People can see you're reliable. They can see you're motivated. You're actually like doing code or whatever. So those are all good things to do. And that, like I said, that first step, your first job, full-time job is going to be like the hardest move you probably make in your engineering career. So anything you can do to help with that is great. So I mentioned earlier finding a team with good standards or that you like working with. That's another thing I would really recommend is there's this phenomenon that people know about in the software engineering industry where like somebody can get, they call it like, you know, uh, 5 years of your first year of experience. So like basically somebody that's basically been doing the same things over and over every year and not really progressed at all. And one of the best things you can do is find ways to kind of like set your sights on good standards or be working towards better standards. It'll take a long time to get there. I think even mid-level and like senior people feel like they're constantly striving for those higher standards as well. But what you really don't want to do is fall into bad practices right out of the gate, and be learning bad habits and bad ways to do things, that can really limit what you're able to do. Because if you've got 2 or 3 or 4 years experience somewhere and you move on and then you're interviewing and you don't know any of these things about good practices, that's going to be a serious problem for you. So there's a lot of things you can do to help out with that. So there's a lot of tools, just automated tools you can get to help you with this. So there's things called static code analysis tools that will look at your code, tell you like common problems, mistakes, things you might want to change. I use those. I've been in programming for over a decade, and anytime I jump into a new language, that's one of the first things I do is set that up. There's paid services like Code Climate that will help you with this too. They'll try to give you an overall quality score for your code and point out things that could be improved. There's things called linters, so you can use a linter as you're working, and it will basically look for like both style and quality issues in the code you're writing as you write it. And then you can also run it just like on all your code or when you open a pull request or whatever. Um, and then testing and code coverage tools are also very helpful. So if you are not testing your code, I would recommend starting that immediately. It has a lot of benefits. One is it makes sure that the code you're writing is simple enough it can be tested, which is really important. It's hard to kind of retrofit test on a huge code base that hasn't been tested. It'll force you to decide what it is you're trying to do first. So generally you'll want to write your test saying this is how it should work. It won't work because you haven't written the code, so you'll see it fail. And then when you actually write the code, you can see that then the test passes. So the code's doing exactly what you intended it to do, which is always good. And it's very helpful for just forcing you to do like the minimal thing you need to do to get the test to pass, versus debating 30 different ways you could write the code or writing code to cover a million different cases you're never going to actually run into. And it will encourage you to do a lot of other good practices like keep your changes small, keep your commits small. It'll help you with pairing. It's a really good thing, practice to get into. So testing, automated tools, anything you can do like that to help ensure that you're writing good quality code. The other thing that's really going to help you out there is if you can find ideally a person, even better, or also good as a team or like a product or company where you're really interested in working with them and you know that they have good standards. Especially if you're getting started, it's good to work with a team of good, experienced people that you can learn from. I would really stay away from being like the only engineer or one of like 2 or 3 engineers somewhere especially earlier in your career, just because that you may not have that opportunity really to learn from the people around you, or you don't necessarily know like what their standards are going to be. So I would look for like a bigger team where you have a chance to learn from more people. And one thing that's cool about that too is, I'm not saying you have to go work for like a gigantic company, but within an organization, you'll find people who are like very good at different things, and can kind of expose you to some different technologies or different techniques, or just generally give you a wider perspective on like what kinds of things you could be doing. So that's always really good and really interesting. And yeah, kind of along the lines of like standards, like things change really fast, so it's really easy to get spread thin as a software engineer. And it's good to know a little bit about all the parts of the process, but you're probably going to need to pick like 1 or 2 very specific things to really learn a lot about. And one of those will probably be whatever the language is that you choose to work in. So if you're doing iOS development, maybe that's like Swift or Objective-C. If you're doing web development, it could be all kinds of things. If you're doing machine learning, you're probably doing like Python. But really get to know that tool pretty well, and how to use it. You want to kind of, I'm not saying you need to spend all your time on one thing, but you want to get pretty good one or two things that you're pretty interested in doing. And part of that is if you like switch jobs or projects or whatever, there's going to be um, like people who are recruiting or hiring are going to be looking for competence and a few different things. They'll probably have a huge list of stuff that they want, but really it'll come down to knowing 1 to 3 things really well, and then all the other stuff's kind of like nice to have. And then on the kind of caveat there that I mentioned was like it's good to know a little bit at least about all the parts of the process. So knowing what's usually referred to as like DevOps, which can entail a lot of stuff, but generally it's you know the process of getting the application after it's built out in production in front of customers, being able to support it, monitor it, do automated deployments, and it can entail a ton of stuff. But generally, if you know a little bit at least about how that process works, that's super helpful. There's always a shortage of and that skill and just experience on teams. So that's something people are pretty much always looking for. And that might mean knowing a little bit about some parts of AWS or Google Cloud Platform. Could mean knowing a little bit about Docker, Kubernetes. Yeah, there's just it's a really big area. So it never hurts to know a little bit more about that. So I would definitely recommend digging in there a little bit at least. Kind of as you go through too, like one of the most valuable resources you have is time, obviously. And people, I've made this mistake in the past, but people assume like the best person to learn from is somebody who's mastered something. And while that person's probably the right person to get an answer about like the absolute correct or best way to do something, that's often not the answer you need. And typically people who have mastered something completely have kind of a hard time communicating with people who are learning and like relating to the problems they're having, just because everything's like it's partly second nature to them because they mastered it and they've done it so much. It's partly they may not even be familiar with like the most recent changes in the tool that they've used. They might be more focused on like the longer term aspects or strategy of the tool. And then there's this thing called the Dreyfus Model that basically suggests as you move up in expertise, you have a harder time relating to people like with less expertise to teach them, just because you're operating in kind of a different way. And generally, you want to find, if you're looking for somebody to learn from, you want to find somebody who's like a level or two maybe ahead of you, but not like all the way up in like a master. And the cool thing too is if you're teaching about what you're learning or experiencing or what's working for you and not working for you as you start, at kind of the junior level, like you're gonna have the biggest audience there for. If you think about it as like a pyramid of skill, right? Like you're gonna have the biggest population is going to be the least experienced, and then you're going to have, as you go up, less and less people in those increasing levels of mastery. So if you're teaching as you go, you're teaching a big group of people, and in thinking like long term about your career, it's good to think about people outside of your company knowing who you are, right? Like you want to probably build up some kind of reputation in your industry, and doing things like writing about what you're doing, making videos about what you're doing. Could be writing open source code that other people can use. Anything to kind of like get your name out there, and really expose you to the community beyond just your company, because a company can be kind of a not always like a great representation of the overall community. But anything to help you kind of like build an audience and get your name out there is super helpful. Later in your career too, or maybe even as you go, you might have an interest in doing things like speaking at events, like industry events, teaching other people about the tools and technology or the industry that you're in. You may want to build some small products as you go, like maybe it's writing like a small book or a small course online. You may have plans to release like an actual product, like a physical product or a piece of software or something. And like any of that stuff that you want to do, the hardest thing you're going to have to do is find an audience and then find like a need that that audience has, and then building the software is just like, or building the product is just kind of addressing a need, right? So um, because the hardest part of that whole process is finding an audience and finding a need, if you can build an audience as you go, and when you get around to actually doing a product, you've got that built-in audience, and it'll be much easier for you to be successful with the kind of your longer term plans. Um, and you can't do it overnight. Like you can't, it's going to take you a year or two of, regular publishing to really kind of get your name out there. So the earlier you can start that, the better. Um, yeah, I would really recommend too. Like YouTube's great. Like we're here, you're probably watching this on YouTube right now. That's a great way to build an audience. I know it sounds really dated, but mailing lists actually are a really good way to like um, have an audience you can communicate with. I know in software development, everybody's always surprised that people still rely heavily on email, but turns out that's one of the best ways to build an audience and stay in touch with them. Um, yeah, and just if you have the opportunity to speak, I would recommend like if you have the opportunity to speak within your team, try to do that as much as you can. If you have like department-wide meetings, I would encourage you to try to speak there as well. Often that's like demos for what you've been working on, or just like company meetings or whatever. The more experience you can get with that kind of stuff, the better. Um, and then if you're interested in it, right? If you're interested in making videos, just jump in and do it. It doesn't have to be super professional. You just got to start somewhere. And again, that's just going to help with any of your longer term goals. Even if you like go outside of software engineering and do something totally different, all that stuff will transfer with you. And I guess my last bit of advice with thinking longer term about what you're doing is just you're going to be hopefully be working with a lot of different people as you go through your career, and I would just say uh, just be respectful to them, treat them professionally. You'll have differences with people; it doesn't have to get personal. uh, and hopefully you're meeting people as you go that have similar interests as you, or can help kind of push you along and help you develop professionally. And building up a network is just something that happens slowly over time. But it's something I've personally been uh, bad about, like staying in touch with people and following up with people that I worked with in the past. But yeah, I would just encourage you to kind of seek out people that you might want to stay in touch with as time goes on, even outside of whatever company or team it is that you're on, working with them on at the moment. So yeah, those are my tips for anybody starting out or early in their career. Hope this was helpful. If you have any comments or suggestions, please leave them down below. If you're interested in seeing more videos like this, hit subscribe and hit the notification bell to be notified as new videos come out. If you like this, hit the like button. Really helps me out. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.